Coming up next, Strawberry Shortcake, Berry Bitty Adventures. Coming up next, Strawberry Shortcake's Berry Bitty Adventures. Coming up next, Home, Adventures with Tip and O. Coming up next, Home for the Holidays. Coming up next, Ben 10. Coming up next, Robotomy. Coming up next, Care Bears. Coming up next, My Little Pony. Coming up next, Naruto. Coming up next, Sailor Moon. Coming up next, Yakety Yak. Coming up next, Ruby Gloom. Coming up next, Zip Zip. Coming up next, Jimmy Two Shoes. Coming up next, Kif. Coming up next, Barry. Coming up next, Haley's World. Coming up next, Haley's On It. Coming up next, Phineas and Ferb. Coming up next, Milo Murphy's Law. Coming up next, The Ghost and Molly McGee. Coming up next, Hamster and Gretel. Coming up next, Grimm. Coming up next, Gladys. Coming up next, Bernie. Coming up next, Bonnie.